Today's lesson is all about music theory. This is going to be the least production-focused tutorial of the series, but in many ways it's actually the most important. The vast majority of people struggle to create music without a basic understanding of theory. So unless you're the reincarnation of John Lennon, it's probably best to become acquainted with it. So let's get into it. First, we're going to open up a blank project and drag FL keys into the workspace. We can find FL keys in the leftmost section of the main window, but if we don't see it immediately, we can hit the search button here and type in FL keys, hit enter, and then it should show up. Let's left click and drag it out here into the main window. With FL keys open, let's open up the piano roll with our F7 shortcut, because this is going to help us understand music theory a lot faster. So first we're going to begin our discussion with melody. Melody is the part of the song that you hum. When you hum Happy Birthday to yourself, you're humming the melody. So more precisely, melody is a two-dimensional representation of pitch. Pitch is how high or low something sounds. In one dimension, which we can think of as being vertical, we have the pitch, also called a note's frequency. We can move the pitch that we have either lower or higher. Then we can move on to the horizontal aspect of melody, which is when in time a note comes about. We can have it right at the beginning, or we can have it further down. So what we're going to do is draw out a very simple melody now. We're going to start on C5, and then we're going to draw in D, E, G, F, E, D, and E. I drew these notes in off screen to save some time, but let's listen to what they sound like. Pretty simple. But let's dive into what these notes' names mean and how they relate to one another. Let's imagine that we were looking down a spiral staircase from above. On each stair, we have a note written. The stairs go down in circles, but where the stairs are from our perspective, we can only see a single circle. If we were to walk down the stairs, however, we would repeatedly walk in the same circle shape, lower and lower on the staircase, passing by the same notes that were written on the stairs. Likewise, music has a circular pattern of notes that repeats itself as the pitch increases or decreases. These notes are A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, and G sharp. Some of these notes actually have two names, the notes that have a sharp in them, because they can either be called a lower note, sharp, or the higher note, flat. So an example here would be A sharp being the same note as B flat. The distance between each of these notes is called a half step. Knowing this is important when it comes to understanding scales, and then later on harmony and all sorts of other aspects of music theory. So these 12 notes, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, and G sharp, are what we use in Western music to create the vast majority of songs. 12 notes. Let that sink in. That's almost every song you've ever heard. It's just those 12 notes. But there are not just 12 instances of these notes. As we said before, these notes repeat as the pitch is increased or decreased in the same way that that spiral staircase kept going up or down. To keep track of this, we'll give notes a number after them to designate how high or how low they are in a normal set of notes. So we can have an A that's called A5, but if we go up 12 notes, we'll find another A called A6. If you take a look here, we have C5 right here, but if we scroll up, we can find C6 here. If you listen to the two notes, they sound very similar. That's because they're an octave apart. When two notes are an octave apart, it means that the higher note's frequency, or pitch, is double the frequency, or pitch, of the lower note. That's why they sound so similar. Their wavelengths line up in a 2-to-1 ratio, which makes them fit together very nicely, and our ears interpret them as being very similar. Now, let's delete the data that we have in the piano roll and mess around a little bit. We can just draw in a random sequence of notes and see how that sounds. Alright, let's let's line these up so that they're not all haphazard. That'll do for now, and now let's give it a listen. It sounds pretty terrible. The reason why that pattern didn't sound very good is because not all notes complement one another in a way that the human ear finds pleasing. As a result, we can use scale patterns. Scale patterns are patterns of notes based on a scale that sound good together. Again, this has to do with the frequencies that we were talking about before. But to be honest, the specifics are irrelevant to what we're doing today. What's important to understand is that notes that are all within the same scale sound good together. Today we're going to talk about the two most popular scales in Western music, major and minor scales. Each has its own pattern that can be moved and manipulated to yield different results in sounds and moods, as well as variations. But for now, we're going to keep it simple and just look at traditional major and minor. For a major scale, we first pick a note to start at, and this note is called the root note, and it's the big idea of the music made in that scale. It's also called the tonic, and so the root note is the ultimate note to use when playing a song in a certain scale. Let's go ahead and delete our mishmash of notes here in the piano roll, and instead, let's replace it with a single C note on C5. This is going to be the tonic of the major scale we're about to play. Major scales have the following organization. You have your first note, the root note. Your second note is 1/2 step, 2/2 steps higher than the first note. Then, for the third note, we go 1/2 step, 2/2 steps higher. For the fourth, we go 1/2 step. For the fifth note, we go 2/2 steps. For the sixth, we go 2. For the seventh, we go 2. And now, we've returned back to our root note. You play these notes together, and they sound pleasing to the ear. This pattern and the distance between these notes is the same for notes in any major scale. As a result, if we were to take this entire pattern and then move it upward, now we have a C sharp major scale. The notes themselves aren't what's important to make a scale pattern. Instead, it's the distance between them. While we certainly could keep all of these notes in the C sharp major scale, let's move them down to the C to illustrate another important point. Each of these notes lines up with a white key on the piano. This is because all of the C major scale is on the piano's white keys. So if you're using a MIDI controller or if you have a piano and you want to play in scale, so long as you stick to the white keys, you're playing in a traditional C major scale, which is going to make whatever you play sound a heck of a lot better than if you stray and accidentally hit a note that's out of scale. If you want to make your life working in scales within FL Studio a lot easier, you'll recall that from our piano roll tutorial we talked about within the piano roll helpers section, we can turn on scale highlighting. Here you can see we were already highlighting for the C major scale, so it's very easy for us to see where we can put notes in the piano roll to stay within the scale. If you forgot, to get to that point, we're going to go to the piano rolls menu, go to helpers, and then turn on scale highlighting and select exactly what we want to highlight. Again, this is super helpful if you're constructing melodies, chords, or anything, and you want to stay within a specific scale. Minor scales have a different pattern of steps, and we'll draw those in now, once again starting from C. So, first we're going to go up 2 half steps, which we can also call a whole step. Then we're just going to go up a half step. Then we're going to go up a whole step, then another whole step, then a half step, and a whole, and then one more whole to get back to our root note. Let's play this to hear it. It's often said that songs written according to a minor scale, or in more proper terms, written in a minor key, sound sad and dark, and that songs written in a major scale sound happy. While this can definitely be the case, it is absolutely not a hard and fast rule. Just give a listen to Someone Like You by Adele, written in major, and Yeah by Usher, written in minor, and you'll see that there is so much more to these keys than a single mood. When it comes to scale nomenclature, which means how we name scales, we start with the root note, here, that would be C, and then insert the kind of scale. So we just made a minor scale. So this scale is in the key of C minor. Our next topic is harmony, which builds off of melody. Let's think of harmony as someone with a higher voice singing along to a song with someone who has a lower voice. This is a simple version of harmonizing. Technically speaking, harmony can be thought of as the vertical axis of music itself, finding notes that are higher or lower than what's being played and harmonizing with them so that it all sounds good. Let's make a tune now and we'll harmonize. First, we're going to take this C minor scale that we made earlier, duplicate it, and drag it up 5 steps. So remember, we'll highlight everything, hold down Shift, click on our selection, and then we can move our selection. Once it's been moved, we can release Shift and the click, and then we can click again and drag up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let's move it to be back in time and listen to what it sounds like. Not only did that harmonized version of scales sound nice, it should remind you of a concept that you've heard in music before: chords. Chords are simply groups of harmonized notes that have certain structures. Let's investigate typical major and minor chords. We'll clear out the piano roll, and then we'll draw in notes C, E, and G. This, right here, is the C major chord. Again, the namings of chords is similar to the namings of scales. The root note is followed by the type of chord. So here, the root note is C. It's based on the major scale, so it's a C major chord. If you drag this chord up and don't change the pattern, you're going to get other major chords. We'll drag it up to a G and give this a listen. Minor chords are very similar to major chords, except that for the pattern of a minor chord, the middle note is moved down by 1. Let's give a listen to this G minor chord. It does sound pretty sad, to be honest. But again, keep in mind that doesn't mean it has to be. Let's drag this back down to a root note of C and listen to a C minor chord. All of this being said, everyone knows that a song played on the piano sounds really different from a song being played on the guitar. This is because of the difference in the instrument's timbre. Timbre is the way a sound just sounds. It has to do with the texture of the sound, how it hits your ear, and many other components. So while you might have a scale, a note, a chord, or anything that's the same being played on 2 different instruments, clearly they don't sound the same. It's important when trying to come out with a certain sound that you don't just pick the right notes, but you also pick the right instrument to achieve the timbre that you're hoping for. The last topics that we'll cover today revolve around the speed or beat of the song. Every song has a tempo, which determines the speed of the beat. Beat can usually be felt by the drums and can also be found in chord changes or the cadence of a melody, perhaps in the words that the singer emphasizes. Often, tempo is comprised of beats that are grouped into 4s or 2s, and the first beat of the group, also called the downbeat, is typically louder than the others. This is going to sound like a drum going bum, 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 bum. Tempo can be measured or played in many different ways, but those aren't really of much use to a novice songwriter for now. At the moment, we're going to stick with 4 beats to a measure. Within FL Studio, tempo is measured and controlled at the top of the main window here. This lesson mainly focused on melody and harmony because those are the topics that typically present the biggest challenge to beginners. Down the road, we'll go into greater depth and come to understand more of music theory, especially having to do with tempo and drum patterns, because there's definitely plenty to unpack there. But for now, we feel that this is more than a sufficient basis for going forward in FL Studio. Until then, we look forward to seeing you. This is Mirium Music, signing off.